Stay until morning, the billionaire CEO whispered. Her private chef was already at the door. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's deeply emotional story of two women discovering love where neither of them expected to find it, I have one small favor to ask. Please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story from our channel. It takes only a second, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue bringing you heartfelt, dramatic and unforgettable stories about courage, healing, second chances, and the extraordinary love that can grow between two women. Your support truly means more to us than you know. And before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel, and how many people they bring together. Thank you so much for being here, and for becoming part of our community. Now let us return to our main character and the quiet, unexpected moment when everything she thought she knew about success, loneliness, and love began to change. The night Nora Bennett quit, I finally understood why she had been setting 2 plates on my table for months. At 46, I was supposed to understand people. I had built Whitmore Global from a struggling family investment firm into a company worth billions, negotiated contracts across 3 continents, and learned to read a boardroom before anyone finished pouring the coffee. Business magazines called me disciplined. Competitors called me ruthless. My employees usually called me Ms. Whitmore. But on the night everything began to change, I was simply Claire, standing inside a private elevator with my hand against the polished brass wall because the floor suddenly seemed to be moving beneath me. 10 minutes earlier, I had announced the largest acquisition of my career beneath a storm of camera flashes. Everyone had congratulated me. Someone had opened champagne. My phone had filled with messages containing words like historic, brilliant, and unstoppable. Then the elevator doors closed, the applause disappeared, and I realized I had eaten nothing since half a piece of toast at 6 that morning. By the time I reached my penthouse overlooking Manhattan, my head was pounding. The city glittered beyond 30 feet of glass, millions of windows glowing like tiny lives being lived without me. My refrigerator contained sparkling water, mustard, 3 lemons, and an expensive bottle of champagne I couldn't remember buying. That was when my chief of staff, Rebecca, called. Please tell me you're eating. I'm considering a lemon. Her silence lasted long enough to become judgmental. Claire, your doctor called me. I closed my eyes. That seems wildly inappropriate. You nearly fainted tonight. I got dizzy. You haven't taken a real lunch break in 11 days. I walked into the kitchen, loosening the collar of my blouse. The marble counters were immaculate because nobody actually used them. I'll order something. No. You're getting a private chef. I laughed once. Absolutely not. Too late. She starts Monday. And then Rebecca hung up on me, which was probably why I paid her so well. Monday arrived with rain tapping softly against the windows and 3 meetings already running behind schedule. At exactly 5:30 my doorbell rang. I expected someone carrying knives in a monogrammed case and an ego large enough to require its own guest room. Instead, Nora Bennett stood outside wearing a simple navy coat, her brown hair pinned loosely behind her head, holding 2 canvas grocery bags. Claire Whitmore. Unfortunately. Nora smiled. Not nervously. Not strategically. Just warmly. I'm Nora. Rebecca hired me to keep you from surviving on coffee and stubbornness. Ist daher. Most people apologized immediately after teasing me. Nora simply stepped toward the kitchen when I moved aside. She unpacked fresh vegetables, herbs, bread, and ordinary ingredients that somehow made my enormous kitchen look less like a showroom. Then she opened my refrigerator and became completely still. Wow. What? I've seen college dorm refrigerators with better survival plans. Against my will I smiled. Nora glanced around the silent penthouse, then toward the dining table built for 12 people. Something in her expression changed. She wasn't impressed by the skyline or the artwork or the price of anything surrounding us. She looked almost sad. Then she turned to me and asked the one question nobody had asked me in years. Claire, when was the last time you actually sat down and ate with another person? I opened my mouth, ready with some clever answer. Nothing came. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that frightened me more than nearly collapsing in the elevator. For 3 days after Nora asked me that question, I avoided answering it. Avoidance was one of the few luxuries money could still buy me. I could schedule another meeting, take another call, or turn a quiet evening into 4 hours of reviewing projections nobody needed until Friday. Nora noticed. Of course she noticed. On Wednesday evening, I walked into the penthouse with my laptop open in one hand and my phone pressed to my ear, discussing quarterly forecasts while Nora placed a bowl of roasted tomato soup beside fresh sourdough bread. I thanked her with a distracted nod and carried everything toward my office. "No," she said. I stopped. Nobody said no to me in that tone. "Excuse me." Nora pointed toward the dining table. "You eat there." I almost laughed. "I have work." "You always have work. That is generally what happens when you run a company." Nora folded a kitchen towel and calmly set it beside the sink. 20 minutes. 20 minutes for what? Dinner. At the table. Without your laptop. I stared at her as if she had proposed moving the company headquarters to the moon. "Rebecca hired you to cook." "She hired me because you nearly passed out after forgetting that food exists." "I did not forget." "Then prove it." There was no disrespect in her voice, which somehow made the challenge harder to dismiss. She simply pulled out a chair. 20 minutes, Claire. The world will survive." I should have refused. Instead, perhaps because the soup smelled like something from a childhood I rarely allowed myself to remember, I closed my laptop. The first few minutes were unbearable. Without a screen in front of me, I became aware of everything. Rain against the windows, the distant hum of traffic 40. Floors below, the warmth of the bowl between my hands. Then I tasted the soup. I stopped. My mother used to make something like this. Nora looked up. Good memory? Before everything became complicated. She did not ask what that meant. She simply tore a piece of bread and sat across from me with her own bowl. That surprised me more than anything. "You are eating?" That is usually how dinner works. Employees do not normally have dinner with me. Then tonight can be unusual. Something about that sentence stayed with me. The next evening there were 2 plates again. And the evening after that. 20 minutes became a ritual neither of us officially acknowledged. I learned Nora had grown up outside Albany, that she preferred old jazz records to television, and that she believed almost every bad day could be improved by garlic, butter, or both. She learned that I hated olives, loved apple pie, and secretly watched baseball highlights when I could not sleep. By Friday, I found myself leaving the office at 6:45 instead of 8. I told myself it was because my doctor wanted regular meals. But when the elevator opened and I heard Nora laughing at something on the radio, the penthouse felt different. Warmer. Lived in. She glanced at the clock. 7 minutes early. Do not get accustomed to it. I would never dare. She placed 2 plates on the table. My phone immediately buzzed. I reached for it, but Nora raised one eyebrow. I looked at the screen, then turned the phone face down. For the first time in years, someone had created a boundary around 20 minutes of my life, and somehow I did not feel trapped inside it. I felt protected. What I did not understand yet was that Nora was not teaching me how to eat dinner. She was quietly teaching me how to be present for my own life. By the following Tuesday, our 20-minute dinners had become the only meetings on my calendar that I never wanted to cancel. I still pretended otherwise. Nora still pretended not to notice. Then the weather changed. Snow began falling over Manhattan shortly after 4 in the afternoon, soft at first, almost beautiful against the darkening skyline. By 6, the windows of my office were disappearing behind white streaks, and Rebecca appeared at my door holding her phone. The city is telling people to stay off the roads. I glanced toward the glass. Then go home. I already sent everyone else home. You should leave too. I returned to the report in front of me. I live 12 minutes away. Rebecca sighed. Of course you do. When I finally reached the penthouse, Nora was in the kitchen preparing chicken with rosemary, roasted potatoes, and green beans. Snow pressed against the windows like a white curtain, muting the city beyond them. You made it, she said. Barely. That sounds dramatic for someone who traveled 40 floors in an elevator. I smiled despite myself. We ate at 7, and for once my phone remained untouched for the entire meal. At 7:23, Nora checked the weather and frowned. Trains were delayed. Roads were closing. Her car service had canceled. I can wait downstairs until things improve, she said, reaching for her coat. I looked through the windows. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Nora. She turned. The words should have been easy. I had ordered entire executive teams across oceans with less hesitation. Yet this felt strangely personal. Stay until morning. Her expression softened. Are you sure? There are 6 guest rooms in this apartment. I think we can survive the logistical challenge. Nora smiled. All right. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel Mercer, chairman of the board. I answered and walked toward the living room. His message was simple. Our newest acquisition included 3 regional facilities that analysts considered inefficient. Closing them would improve the quarterly numbers immediately. How many employees? I asked. A little over 400 across all 3. I looked toward the kitchen. Nora was packing leftovers into containers, unaware that hundreds of lives had just become numbers in a conversation. Send me the recommendation. When I ended the call, Nora was watching me. Bad news. Business. That was not my question. I hesitated, then explained. Nora became unusually quiet. 400 people? Approximately. And you can just decide that? The board will vote, but yes, my recommendation carries weight. I heard myself slipping into the language I used with investors. Efficiency, redundancy, shareholder responsibility. Nora listened until I finished. Do you believe all of that? She asked. It is how business works. That is still not what I asked. The room suddenly felt smaller. What exactly are you asking me? Nora met my eyes. Do you believe closing those places is right? Or is business the word you use when you do not want to think about the people inside the numbers? I felt irritation rise, mostly because I had no immediate answer. You do not understand the situation. Maybe not. Her voice remained calm. But I understand what losing a job can do to a family. Something changed in her face then, a sadness I had never seen before. Before I could ask about it, Nora looked toward the snow-covered windows. One of those facilities is outside Albany, is it not? My stomach tightened. Yes. Nora slowly folded the dish towel in her hands. My mother worked there for 22 years. And suddenly, the storm outside was no longer the most complicated thing keeping us under the same roof. For several seconds I said nothing. Snow drifted beyond the windows, erasing Manhattan one building at a time, while Nora stood beneath the warm kitchen lights holding that folded towel as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. My first reaction embarrassed me later. I wondered whether she had known about the acquisition before Rebecca hired her. Whether those dinners, those questions, those 2 plates had been part of some carefully planned attempt to influence me. Suspicion came naturally when you spent 20 years negotiating with people who always wanted something. How long have you known? I asked. Nora understood immediately. About the acquisition? Since it became public. And you never thought to mention your connection? No, why? Because I was hired to cook for you, Claire, not lobby you. Her answer should have reassured me. Instead, I heard the coldness entering my own voice. Your mother worked there for 22 years, and now you happen to work in my home while I am deciding whether that facility stays open. You understand how that looks. Nora stared at me, and disappointment slowly replaced surprise. Yes, she said quietly. I understand exactly how it looks to someone who expects every kindness to come with an invoice. The words landed harder than I wanted them to. That is unfair. Is it? She placed the towel on the counter. My mother started there when I was 7. She packed my lunch before sunrise, drove 40 minutes each way, and still came home asking about my homework. That job helped keep food on our table. It helped pay for community college when I decided I wanted to cook professionally. But she also taught me something else. Never confuse gratitude with silence. I looked toward the dark windows. Is she still there? Nora shook her head. She passed away 3 years ago. My irritation vanished so quickly that shame took its place. Nora, I am sorry. Thank you. Her voice softened, but she did not rescue me from the discomfort. There are people there now who knew her. Families I grew up with. But I was never going to ask you to save their jobs because of me. Why not? Nora stepped closer to the dining table and touched the back of the chair where she usually Saturday, because if you keep that facility open as a favor to your private chef, nothing really changes. Tomorrow there will be another facility, another spreadsheet, another 400 people. You have to decide what kind of leader you want to be when nobody you care about is standing in your kitchen. I had spent years surrounded by consultants who charged thousands of dollars an hour to tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. Nora had no presentation, no projections, no carefully rehearsed argument. She simply gave me the truth and trusted me to do something with it. What would you do? I asked. I would go there. To Albany? Yes. I have reports. Reports tell you what a facility costs. They cannot tell you what it means. I looked at her for a long moment. Come with me. Nora immediately shook her head. No, why? Because then you will watch my face instead of theirs. That answer silenced me. The storm continued through the night, but we did not return to our usual easy conversation. Nora took one of the guest rooms. I remained at the dining table long after midnight with the board report open in front of me. 417 employees. Labor expense. Property value. Operating margin. Numbers I had reviewed 1,000 times suddenly seemed incomplete. Beside my laptop sat the 2 plates Nora had washed and left to dry. For the first time in my career, I wondered how many human stories could disappear inside a clean spreadsheet. At 7 the next morning I called Rebecca. Cancel my Thursday meetings. She sounded startled. All of them. All of them. Where are you going? I looked toward the kitchen, where Nora quietly poured coffee without asking what I had decided. Albany. There was a pause. Should I arrange a company visit? No executives. No announcement. No presentation. I closed the report. I want to see what the numbers forgot to tell me. Nora looked over then, and for the first time since the night before, she smiled. Thursday morning arrived with a pale winter sun reflecting off snowbanks along the highway, and for the first time in years, I traveled somewhere without an assistant, a presentation, or a room full of people preparing for my arrival. Rebecca had arranged a car, but I asked the driver to stop 2 blocks from the Albany facility. I wanted to walk the rest of the way. The building was smaller than I had imagined from the reports. A low brick complex beside a frozen parking lot filled with ordinary sedans and pickup trucks dusted with snow. 417 employees had been reduced to 3 lines in a financial analysis. Standing there, I suddenly felt the absurdity of that. Inside, I introduced myself only to the facility manager and asked him not to make an announcement. Just show me a normal day, I said. He looked terrified by the request, which told me something about the culture I had created without realizing it. We walked through production areas, storage rooms, offices, and a break room that smelled like coffee and microwaved soup. People talked about equipment, schedules, their children, mortgage payments, and weekend plans. Nobody spoke like a spreadsheet. Then an older woman named Margaret Ellis noticed my last name on the visitor badge. Whitmore, she asked. You are Claire Whitmore? I nodded. She studied me for a moment before smiling. I knew a woman who would have gotten a kick out of this. Who? Evelyn Bennett. My breath caught. Nora's mother. Margaret pointed toward a faded photograph pinned to a community board. A group of employees stood beneath a banner from a charity food drive years earlier. Evelyn was near the center, smiling beside boxes of canned goods. She organized that every Thanksgiving, Margaret said, would not let anybody leave until every box was packed. I looked at the photograph longer than necessary. Nora told me she worked here. Margaret's eyebrows lifted. You know Nora? She cooks for me. Margaret laughed warmly. That sounds like Nora. Always feeding somebody. Then her expression softened. Evelyn used to say a job should give you more than a paycheck. It should let you go home with enough dignity and energy left to love your family. That sentence followed me all the way back to Manhattan. By Monday, I had rejected the original closure proposal. Instead, I ordered a full operational review focused on modernization, retraining, and voluntary transfers. The revised plan cost more in the short term, and Daniel Mercer called it sentimental. No, I told him. It is long-term management. We have been treating people as disposable because replacing a number looks easier than improving a system. There was silence on the line. I realized I was not asking permission. That evening I arrived home before 7. Nora was setting the table. 2 plates. Always 2 plates. How was Albany? She asked. I removed my coat slowly. Your mother is still there. Nora froze. I told her about the photograph, Margaret, the food drive, and the sentence about dignity. Nora looked down, blinking rapidly. She said that all the time. I changed the recommendation. Nora looked up immediately. Because of her? No, I sat across from her. Because I finally went there and did my job properly. Something quiet passed between us. Not gratitude. Not victory. Something deeper. Then I am glad you went, she said. We ate without discussing business again. Over the following weeks, the 2 plates became the center of my evenings. I began leaving the office earlier. Sometimes Nora told stories while she cooked. Sometimes I chopped vegetables badly enough to make her laugh. Once I caught myself looking forward to that laugh during a board meeting and nearly smiled at the wrong moment. The penthouse changed too. There were herbs growing beside the kitchen window. A jazz station played softly after 7. My dining table no longer looked like furniture staged for a magazine photograph. It had crumbs on it, coffee rings, life. One Friday evening, Nora placed a slice of warm apple pie in front of me. You remembered, I said. Of course. I looked at the second plate across from mine and understood something that frightened me because no financial model could measure it. I was no longer coming home because my doctor wanted me to eat properly. I was coming home because Nora was there. And somewhere between the soup, the snowstorm, and 2 ordinary plates on an enormous table, the place I had purchased to prove I had succeeded was beginning to feel like the one thing money had never been able to buy me: home. By early March, the Albany decision had become the most expensive argument of my career. The revised plan protected most of the jobs, but the board hated the short-term cost. Analysts questioned my judgment, and one business network spent an entire afternoon debating whether I had become too emotional to lead. 10 years earlier, that word would have infuriated me. Emotional. It was the accusation powerful women were expected to fear. This time I simply turned off the television. Then Daniel called. We need to reconsider Albany before the shareholder meeting. No, Claire, the market does not reward sentiment. I looked through my office window at Manhattan glowing beneath the evening sky. Good thing I made the decision using numbers then. Numbers that cost us money. This quarter. Investors live quarter to quarter. Employees do not. Daniel went silent. So did I. 6 months earlier I would never have said that. By the time I reached home it was almost midnight. The penthouse lights were low, and for one terrible second I thought Nora had already left. Then I smelled rosemary and warm bread. She was sitting at the kitchen island reading a cookbook, her glasses resting low on her nose. You are still here. Nora looked at the clock. Apparently. You did not have to wait. I know. Those 3 words stopped me. She had stayed because she chose to, not because I had asked. Nora closed the book. Bad day. The board thinks I have lost my mind. Have you? Possibly. She smiled and warmed a bowl of vegetable stew. I sat at the table while she brought over 2 plates and joined me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. I realized how rare it had become for silence to feel comfortable. I used to think leadership meant never letting anyone see uncertainty. I said finally. My father believed hesitation was weakness. Nora tore a piece of bread. And what do you believe? I looked at her. I am still figuring that out. That sounds healthier. I laughed softly. You have an irritating habit of making complicated things sound simple. Cooking teaches you that. When something tastes wrong, you cannot fix it by pretending it tastes right. I watched her smile, and the room seemed suddenly smaller, quieter. You changed this place, I said. Nora glanced around. The herbs helped. I am serious. She became still. Claire, before you came here I thought this apartment was peaceful. Now I realize it was just empty. Nora held my gaze. I could hear the refrigerator humming and a distant siren far below on 5th Avenue. You make it feel different, I continued. Different how? There it was. The question I had been avoiding for weeks. I knew the answer. Home. Safe. Expected. Important. But beneath all of those words was another truth I was only beginning to admit. I cared about Nora in a way that had nothing to do with food, schedules, or employment. I stood, and she did too, collecting the plates almost automatically. We ended up facing each other beside the table, close enough that neither of us could pretend the moment was ordinary. Nora's expression softened. For one suspended second, I thought she might say what I could not. Instead, she stepped back. "I work for you." The words were gentle, but unmistakable. My heart sank. I know. And that matters. I wanted to argue that I would never pressure her, never use my position against her, but suddenly I understood that good intentions did not erase unequal power. Nora deserved to know that every choice she made around me was completely free. "You are right," I said. Surprise crossed her face. "That does not make this easier," she whispered. The word stayed between us. She had not denied what I felt. She had acknowledged it. Somehow that was both comforting and painful. Nora gathered her coat a few minutes later. At the door, she looked back at me. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Nora." The elevator doors closed between us, and I returned to the dining room. 2 empty plates remained on the table. For most of my life, I had believed love meant finding something precious and making certain you never lost it. That night, I began to understand a harder truth. Sometimes caring for someone meant refusing to hold them too tightly, even when every frightened part of you wanted them to stay. For the next week, Nora and I became painfully careful with each other. The 2 plates remained, the 20-minute dinners continued, and we still talked about ordinary things, but something invisible had moved between us. Every sentence seemed to stop just before becoming too honest. I told myself this was maturity. By Friday, I could no longer stand it. My entire career had been built on solving problems, and somewhere along the way I had developed the dangerous belief that every problem could be solved if I offered enough resources. So I did what came naturally. I made a plan. Nora arrived that evening carrying groceries and found a cream-colored folder beside her place at the table. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." She read the first page, then the second. Her expression changed. "Claire, this says you are tripling my salary." "Keep reading." She did. "A 5-year contract? With full benefits and complete control over your schedule." Nora turned another page and stopped. I had saved the part one considered most generous for last. "You bought a restaurant?" "Technically. I acquired a commercial property in Greenwich Village. The restaurant would be yours to operate. You once told me you dreamed about having your own place." I had expected surprise. Maybe happiness. Instead, Nora quietly closed the folder. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve it." "That is not why." I felt my confidence slipping. "I want you to have security. And you want me to stay." There was no anger in her voice. Somehow that made it worse. "Is wanting you here so terrible?" No, Nora looked at me with such sadness that I wished she had simply shouted. "But trying to make leaving impossible is." "That is not what I am doing. Claire, you are offering me more money than I could reasonably walk away from, a long-term contract, and the restaurant I have wanted for years. You are putting everything I dream about on one side of a scale, and asking me to believe my feelings are still free." I stared at the folder. 20 minutes earlier, I had thought it proved how much I cared. Now it looked like evidence that I had learned nothing. "I would never expect anything from you personally because of this." "I believe you." "Then what is wrong?" Nora inhaled slowly. "You are still trying to solve love like a business problem." The word love stopped everything. Neither of us had said it before. Nora seemed to realize that too, but she continued. "When my mother was dying, I learned something I wish I had understood sooner. You cannot bargain with what matters. You cannot offer enough money, enough promises, or enough plans to guarantee someone stays." "I am afraid you will leave," I admitted. There it was, stripped of strategy. Nora's eyes softened. "I know. Then tell me what to do." "You have to let me be able to leave." My throat tightened. "And if you do? Then at least you will know I was free to choose." Nora reached into her purse and removed the penthouse key Rebecca had given her months earlier. She placed it beside the folder. The small metallic sound seemed impossibly loud. "I cannot work for you anymore, Claire." I stood. "Nora, please." She shook her head gently. "Do not fix this tonight. I can cancel the contract." Forget the restaurant. We can change everything. That is exactly what I mean. She put on her coat and walked toward the elevator. I followed but stopped several feet away. Every instinct told me to offer something, promise something, do something. Instead, I forced myself to remain still. Nora pressed the elevator button, then looked back. For what it is worth, those dinners mattered to me too. The doors opened. Goodbye, Claire. I could barely answer. Goodbye, Nora. Then she was gone. I returned to the dining room and saw what she had prepared before finding the folder. 2 bowls of soup. 2 glasses of water. 2 plates waiting across from each other. I sat in my usual chair, but I could not touch the food. Across the table, Nora's place remained empty. I had spent my entire adult life believing money created freedom. That night, surrounded by everything money had given me, I finally understood how easily it could become a cage when used to keep someone close. And for the first time, I knew there was nothing I could buy that would bring Nora back. For the first few days after Nora left, I did exactly what she had asked me not to do. I tried to fix everything in my head. I drafted apologies during meetings. I imagined sending flowers, letters, even the restaurant deed with no conditions attached. Then I would hear her voice again. You have to let me be able to leave. So I sent nothing. The penthouse became quiet in a way it had never been before. The silence was no longer invisible because now I knew what had replaced it. On Tuesday evening, I came home at 7 out of habit and found myself standing beside the dining table. I took 1 plate from the cabinet. Then I stopped. For months, Nora had placed 2 there, not because I paid her to sit with me, but because she believed a meal could be more than food. I finally understood that I had mistaken generosity for something I needed to own. The next morning I called Rebecca. Cancel the restaurant purchase. She hesitated. All of it. All of it. And terminate Nora's employment agreement with full final compensation. No conditions, no future obligations. Understood. There is one more thing. The commercial property had already inspired an idea, but this time Nora could not be attached to it. I asked our legal team to create an independent culinary grant program for working-class cooks who wanted professional training or help opening small businesses. Whitmore Global would provide funding, but recipients would be selected by an outside nonprofit board. Nora would owe me nothing because Nora would receive nothing from me. That distinction mattered. 2 Saturdays later, I drove downtown alone to a community kitchen Nora had once mentioned. I had known she volunteered there twice a month. I stood outside for nearly 5 minutes wondering whether showing up was another form of pressure. Then through the window I saw Nora carrying a tray of bread between crowded tables. She looked happy. Not wealthy. Not protected. Happy. I almost left. Then she noticed me. Surprise crossed her face, followed by caution. I walked inside. I can go, I said. I only wanted to apologize in person. Nora set down the tray. Claire. No offer. No contract. No solution. I promise. That earned the smallest smile. That is progress. I told her the restaurant purchase was canceled. I told her about the independent grant program, carefully explaining that it was not hers and never would be unless she someday applied through the same process as everyone else. Nora listened quietly. Why create it at all? Because you taught me that resources can open doors without deciding who walks through them. Her eyes softened. That sounds more like you. I am still trying to figure out who that is. A volunteer hurried over and asked Nora for help preparing vegetables. Nora glanced at me, then toward several crates near the kitchen counter. Do you know how to chop onions? I run a multinational corporation. That was not the question. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Not particularly. Nora handed me an apron. Then start learning. 20 minutes later, I was standing beside retirees, college students, and neighborhood volunteers, chopping onions so slowly that a 70-year-old man named Frank politely moved half my pile to his cutting board. My eyes watered. Nora passed behind me and smiled. Emotional. It is the onions. Of course. I smiled back. Nothing was repaired. Nora had not returned to my penthouse. She had not promised me anything. And strangely, that was what made the afternoon feel important. I was there without authority, without leverage, without a guarantee of what happened next. When our shift ended, Nora walked with me toward the door. Claire. I turned. Would you like coffee sometime? For once, I did not negotiate the terms or search for certainty. I would like that. Outside, the city moved around me as ordinary and unpredictable as ever. I finally understood that love was not a contract protecting me from loss. It was an invitation that remained meaningful only because the other person was always free to say no. And that afternoon, Nora had chosen to say yes. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became Sunday walks through Central Park, and somewhere between early spring and the first warm evenings of May, Nora and I learned how to know each other without a contract between us. She never returned as my private chef. That mattered to both of us. Instead, she took a position consulting for a small restaurant group, while saving toward the place she still dreamed of opening. I learned to cook 3 respectable meals on my own, although Nora insisted my scrambled eggs remained a public safety concern. More importantly, I learned to leave work before the city went dark. The Albany facility stayed open under the modernization plan, and 6 months later its productivity had improved enough that even Daniel stopped calling the decision sentimental. The culinary grant funded its first 12 recipients. I attended the announcement but refused to give the speech. For once, I was comfortable letting someone else stand at the microphone. Then, one October evening, Nora called and asked me to meet her in Greenwich Village. She was waiting outside a narrow brick storefront with green-painted windows and a handwritten sign taped inside. Bennett Table. I stared at it. You did it. Nora smiled. Small business loan, my savings, and one extremely patient landlord. Nouvelle rescue. Not even a little one. I laughed, and the pride I felt was cleaner because none of it belonged to me. 3 weeks later, Bennett Table opened. I was Nora's first reservation. Not investor. Not employer. Just Claire Whitmore, party of one. After the last customers left, Nora brought out warm apple pie and sat across from me. 2 plates rested between us. I looked at them and smiled. You remembered. I always remember. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The restaurant smelled of cinnamon, coffee, and fresh bread. Nothing about it was extravagant, yet I had rarely been anywhere that felt richer. Do you know what frightened me most when you left? I asked. Nora waited. I thought losing you meant I had failed. I looked down at my plate. Then I realized loving someone is not succeeding at keeping them. It is becoming someone they can freely choose. Nora reached across the table and rested her hand over mine. You changed, Claire. I am changing. Better answer. I laughed softly. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows, reminding me of our earliest dinners in the penthouse. Nora glanced toward the clock. It is late. Months ago, those words would have filled me with panic. I might have searched for a reason to make her stay. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently and said, Stay only if you want to. Nora studied me for a long moment, and then her smile appeared, warm and certain. Ido. There was no contract waiting on the table. No salary, no deed, no promise designed to make tomorrow predictable. Just 2 women who had finally reached each other without one owning the road between them. Later, we walked through the quiet restaurant, turning off the lights together. Nora paused beside the front door and looked back at the table she had built through patience, work, and courage. I understood then why she had changed my life. She had never taught me how to keep someone. She had taught me how to make room for them. Years of success had filled my world with things I could control. But love asked something entirely different of me. It asked for trust. It asked for humility. It asked me to open my hands instead of closing them. On the table behind us, 2 empty plates remained beneath the soft kitchen light. Once, they had represented the end of my loneliness. Now they meant something better. Neither of us had to be there. We simply chose to be.